Have you been considering strip tillage on your farm? This 6-part video series is going to look at the equipment, the economics, and how to make strip tillage work for you. Follow along as we discuss the pros, the cons, and the challenges of strip till systems with 4 Ontario farmers who each have their own unique approach to strip till. In this first video, we'll discuss the basics of what a strip till system is.
I'm Ken Nixon. Our farm is Ainley Farms. We're located between Ilderton and Arva, and I farm with my brother Kevin and my father George.
Tell me a bit about how the strip tiller works. What does it do to the residue and what does it do to the soil?
So our strip till rig, which is a Don Pluribus, essentially has a lead coulter, which essentially slices residue and creates a bit of a fissure. Behind that is a set of row cleaners, which essentially move the residue out of the zone and into that 20 inches or so of what's between the zones, and then has 2 coulters mounted essentially on an angle with a cant in at the back, and essentially it lifts the soil and breaks it up a little bit, and that's how essentially the zone is the fluffed by the 2 coulters. The real end result you're after is a no residue, dark place with maybe a little bit of elevation to shed water and to help keep residue off during the winter.
So what purpose do the undisturbed areas between the strips serve?
So the area between the rows actually is a great place for wheel traffic. It carries equipment really, really well. Sprayers, the planting system. That undisturbed soil, though, also is all those cracks and fissures and wormholes and everything are completely undisturbed in that area. And so essentially what you have not done is buried the pantry. It is still there for most of the field, and they still have lots of stuff to work on. And so you keep your earthworm population happy.
So in the absence of guidance on the tractor or implement, how are you sure that you're staying on the strip?
Yeah, so a couple points I'd like to make. And the first one is, as far as making the strip, our experience is guidance, some sort of auto steer is just about absolutely critical. Trying to follow a mark in wheat stubble is just about a absolute no-go. You just can't see it. So we make our strips with auto steer. As far as planting and staying on the strip, for the first darn near 10 years, we did not have auto steer or any kind of guidance on our planter tractor. Essentially, we hand steered it. Our experience was in a shank system where you have probably a higher, narrower berm. It was a little bit more of a challenge to stay on it. Effectively, what you're doing is you're just trying to drive straight ahead and look over your shoulder occasionally to make sure you're centered on the berm. Once we went to a coulter system where it was a wider, flatter berm in the spring, actually we found that the planter stays on it really, really well, and then subsequently we've put auto steer into our planter tractor, and you can spend a lot of time looking over your shoulder to make sure you're where you want to be. So it's not essential, but man, it's really, really nice to have guidance on your planter tractor.
Ken, how do you prepare a seed bed with your strip tiller?
Well, essentially it's done by the 2 coulters that basically lift and fluff up that soil. The row cleaners have moved the residue off the zone. That's really all you need. You don't necessarily need to have it pulverized into a garden.
What kind of seed bed do you look for?
Well, so in a fall strip, what I'm looking for is a zone left fairly chunky, actually. If you make it too fine in the fall, it's a little bit like taking a plowed field and working it in the fall and then expecting it to be in good shape come spring. If you make it too fine in the fall, essentially then it's too tight and and doesn't shed water really well. So our preference in a fall strip is making something kind of chunky. It might still be chunky in the spring, but really when the planter comes along and the row cleaners on the planter just touch it, it just goes to dust and actually makes a really sweet place to put a seedling.
Name's Gary Berger, Berger Farms. I farm in southwestern Ontario in the forest area, myself and one son.
So Gary, when you guys first get that new strip tiller, no experience with the piece of equipment before, a new system for you guys, what do you have to do to gain some familiarity with that equipment and running it how you like it to be run?
We brought it into a field, wasn't ours, just to get it set up and get familiar with it. Got some information from the manufacturer on what we saw and what we'd like to have changed on it, and we learned from there and went 3 years with that system.
So you've gone through, this is your second machine, Gary. I'm just curious, what kind of strip widths have you had working with, originally your Dawn unit and now your TerraForge unit?
We found our Coulter system, it put a decent width berm, 8 to 10 inches wide, but moved it over 3.5 inches off of where it was actually supposed to be.
Right.
Where the unit that we have right now, it pulls up the soil, contains it, and uniformly puts a berm down 8 to 10 inches wide.
Does controlled traffic or nutrient placement play into your system at all, Ken?
We kind of stumbled across it a little bit in that, so we're on RTK, which means if you draw an AB line, essentially you're on that same AB line to within an inch every year now. And so effectively now you're, because we're keeping our strips in the same place now instead of moving them around, then essentially our corn rows are always in the same place. We're never trying to put a corn row into previous year's wheel traffic. As well, our sprayer always runs in the same spot, and the sprayer, quite frankly, is probably the most egregious offender in terms of soil compaction. So it's just it was something, like I said, something we stumbled on. But effectively now, our corn row is always in a place that is not affected by wheel traffic. Our sprayer stays in the same place. Our strip tiller is 12 rows, our corn planter is 12 rows, our sprayer is 90. So effectively, and we're running in tram lines for our wheat and our soybeans. Essentially, we now keep our wheel traffic into zones, and it's working well. We see the benefit of just staying out of the corn zone.
Ken, how have your planting operations for corn changed since you guys started strip tilling? In terms of row cleaners, fertilizer on the planter, any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so not really a lot of change. Before, when we were running a fall disc with a single secondary tillage system or tillage pass in the spring, we were still running a row cleaner, trying to really, at the time, we had a lot of wheat residue, bits and chunks of stuff, and so we were trying to brush that aside with the planter, with the row cleaners. Now that all of that has already been brushed aside by the strip till pass in the fall, effectively all the row cleaners do is essentially any little hump or undulation in the strip, it sort of pushes the hill into the succeeding valley and just crumbles it up a little bit. So planter setups may be a little bit different, but we don't have any different additions or deletions or anything like that compared to what we did when we were fall disking.
So you talked about your soils and that here. Do you farm different soil types here, and does that change how you use and set up the strip till equipment?
So we do have some variance in the soils on our farm. We change it in the cab. There's not much setup difference on the actual machine, so field to field I can change it. We have an airbag on the row cleaner and an airbag on the unit to change the down pressure to help clean the row and to help make a deeper strip if need be.
So as you do change from soil type to soil type and you're making these tweaks in the equipment, what is the target that you're after to tweak?
So our ideal strip would be a nice about 2 to 3 inch berm tall. So in lighter soils, if I have too much pressure, it'll create more of a wave, like an M. So you want to decrease the pressure. In heavier soils, you want the coulters to go in a little bit deeper, pull it up, make that nice 3 inch berm, 2 inch berm.
And on the really heavy clay, we do the best we can.
So going to less tillage in a strip till system, but also some conventional tillage, have you noticed any shifts in weed species, specifically in your corn crop on your farm with the shift?
We see a lot more perennials, some issues with perennials. The rest of weeds, about the same.
Yeah.
But perennials are a bit more of a challenge. We're using more chemical.
So you mentioned going to more herbicides for the perennials. Is that like another burn down pass? Would that be what you would have, or how?
Higher rates.
Higher rates.
Higher rates around it, and follow up with pretty persistent on following up with fall applications.
Okay.
So pretty well, we have a sprayer that pretty well follows combine on most of our fields.
How about in your other crops? Have you noticed differences in weed species shifts or that sort of thing with strip till in your soybean or wheat crops at all?
Not really. Just those same issues with lack of, or not tillage is perennials. Perennials are just more persistent and harder to control.
Ken, do you have any soil types or farms that you are cases where you wouldn't use strip till on?
Not really. In any of our ground and soil types that we're on, we're very comfortable with it. I've done a fair bit of custom work across, a broader range of soil types, and there's really outside of like a marshy muck or something like that. I can't really think that there's a place where I wouldn't use the system.
What crops are just not adaptable to strip till in your scenario?
Certainly cereals. But beans and corn, I think, could be successful, and producers are making it successful. But for us, it's, one of our main focuses is to reduce tillage. And so we're successful with no-till and wheat, soybeans, and even edible beans, that I don't really want to, even though the strip till is drastically minimized tillage, it's still more than I'd like to see in those crops.
So you're quite concerned with soil health, you too. Is the strip till system allow you to manage cover crops differently or better?
Yeah, so the bulk of our cover cropping is aimed to be interseeded in the corn ahead of soybeans. We dabbled a little bit this year because of the fall we were dealt not getting any strip till done, particularly on the corn acres. We changed rotation at the last minute based on previous year's corn yield and particularly biomass. So we ended up strip tilling green fields that had cereal rye interseeded that were intended for soybeans, but because of low trash volumes, we went to corn because we only had one shot at doing the tillage instead of two in our more ideal system. So we have dealt with that, and it turned out fine in the end. We're trying this year to get some sort of interseeding pre-soybean harvest, that perhaps when we clip the beans there might be a very immature crop of oats and radish or something of that nature already growing. We'll see how that goes. But for us, without a lot of winter wheat acres, and when we do get winter wheat, we're just so excited to be able to do some land improvement in the dry summer months that they quite often will sort of get a cover crop, but they'll often end up in a conventional tillage system, just leveling the field out after.
And what is your plan for applying this cover crop into the standing beans? Machine and timing?
Yeah, so we use our self-propelled sprayer. We remove the boom and add a Kuhn Axis European fertilizer spreader. It's suspended 12 feet in the air, and we're broadcasting cereal rye into the corn. I intend to use that to broadcast oats, radish, maybe might try some winter wheat that way, just sort of at that yellow early senescence leaf drop timing.
So are there additional challenges associated with cover crop management in your system when you've got strip till versus some other system?
Yes, actually. So we broadcast over the top of just sort of brown silk to white husk, somewhere in that timing. We're broadcasting over the top cereal rye into our corn. When we were in a conventional tillage program, establishment was very easy. You had a shattered soil structure that even a small amount of rain would make that surface go plastic. The seeds would sink into the soil, and just a light rain would be enough to incorporate, get that seed to soil contact, and you were off to the races fairly rapidly. Now in a strip till situation, particularly corn on corn strip till, you have a lot more residue still there, and the first time we did it in the strip till, the seed disappeared, and we were a little alarmed by that. And then after the first rain, the rye all emerged from the middens. And it was actually the worms that had gathered up all of the cereal rye and planted it in their middens. And since then, actually our successful germination establishment ratio to seeding rate has increased, and we've been able to reduce our seeding rates because the life is actually doing the planting for us. So the longer we're in it, theoretically, we should get a bigger worm population, more life. As long as the worms do not eat the seed, we have been successful, although that first year was rather alarming when 2 days later, everything was gone.
So thinking now to harvest time in a strip till system, have you noticed any changes with harvest operations under strip till corn compared to conventional till?
We find our fields a lot more firmer when we're harvesting. So previous with the plow system, if it was a wet fall, you're going to sink down to the bottom of the plow layer. More ruts. With no-till systems, our fields are definitely a lot firmer.
Strip till system in your corn and then no-till in your beans. When you're combining, how important and how are you dealing in terms of residue management coming through the combine?
Yeah, residue management in strip till and no-till, or even conventional tillage, is extremely critical. When we purchased our last combine, it was actually our number one criteria, was a combine that could spread any residue from any crop full width, regardless of header width. The second criteria was flotation. Combines are extremely heavy, and we wanted tracks. So I take a lot of care, particularly in soybeans, at tweaking the tailboard and adjusting speeds, flaps, to get a residue spread pattern that may not visually be uniform, but will pass the rake test. And if you don't know what the rake test is, you literally take a garden rake and you rake a windrow across the width of your field. I've found that you may still get streaking, but that's only because different portions of the soybean plant will cast different directions. And at the end of the day, what's important is that windrow from the rake test is uniform. And we've been able to do that quite effectively with our combine.
So what has strip till, in combination with all the other things you do in your cropping system, done for your soils as a whole?
That's a great question. So on the soybean side, we've focused on no-till. We've integrated cover crops, planting green, etc. And you can see some instantaneous changes, but they're very fragile and they're not long lasting. And when we came back to corn in the rotation, any benefit really you created was erased through doing the tillage. There definitely is benefit to no-tilling soybeans, but we were losing it on the corn. The thing we noticed year one, which was a challenging year for us, 2017, was water didn't pond as long in our strip till land as it did our conventional tillage. Trafficability of the fields drastically increased. In that first year, it rained nearly every day. Spraying was a nightmare, and it was a night and day scenario, even in year 1. Now that we're year 4, the machine pulls easier. We are starting to see some changes. Earthworm populations have increased and have stayed increased. And it's when we have soil moisture, finding mycorrhizal fungi colonies is actually become quite easy, where growing up in a conventional tillage system, that was unheard of.
So Gary, thinking about your operation, going in to make the switch to strip tillage, what did strip till play in terms of your big vision in terms of cropping on your farm, and then also from a soil and soil health perspective as well?
One of the things that we like about it is you're not buying as much equipment.
Yeah.
More efficient at planting. It's basically the spring is a sprayer and a planter. You don't have less labor. You don't have 2 cultivators out there working ground.
So certainly simplifies spring operations.
Simplify spring operations. It's a simpler approach.
So the primary role strip till has done is it has saved us a lot of capital investment, a lot of labor, and it has quite frankly moved a lot of the spring rush out of the spring and moved it into August, September for us. So essentially, if you can take a primary tillage pass, which is usually done in the fall, plus 2 spring tillage passes done in the spring, plus fertilizer application, put it all in one operation that happens in August, September, when usually our workload's a lot lighter, then that was a huge move and a huge win for us.